So just a little bit of tidbit of info for you viewers. Jordan normally shoots with like a 20 to 50 millimeter equivalent or 24 to 70 equivalent, but in the interest of trying to maintain our distance from each other today, he's actually shooting telephoto. So bear with him, he's quite far away from me. This is how we're gonna do the video today. Luckily we've got wireless microphones. Welcome back, Deep Your View TV viewers. We have a little bit of a departure from our normal gear reviews today because today we're playing with the Nikon Coolpix 950. Now, this is a compact camera with a humongous zoom range, 83 times optical zoom range. And you know, the Coolpix 900 had a very similar lens and had a very similar kind of design, and that was a wildly successful camera. It was back ordered for over a year. I mean, it was just everybody wanted it. You couldn't get your hands on it. Now, Nikon obviously feel many years later that there was still absolutely desire to have a camera with this kind of zoom range. So we're really looking forward to a lot of the new features like the 4K recording, the ability to shoot RAW, and that better EVF. Let's get out there, have some fun in our very empty city right now, and see what this lens can do. This is astounding. I mean, I knew it. I knew it the whole time. Okay. So this camera has an incredible 24 to 2000 millimeter full frame equivalent lens range. And with the 2000 millimeters, this camera has manifested a revelation to me. I'm looking through this 2000 millimeter lens and I'm seeing such far distances from this high vantage point. I can still see mountains with it. The horizon looks totally flat, even at those distances. I mean, if there was any curvature to the earth, I wouldn't be able to see that. I'd see bending, those mountains would be falling away. I don't buy it anymore. I knew it. This lens has revealed that the earth is flat. It always has been flat. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. You know, on conditions like today, even though it's quite cold here, I'm still getting a lot of temperature variations, all that distortion from heat rising. And so using that 2000 millimeter range, you can see here very clearly, quite soft, lots of that distortion. Now, on top of all that, the aperture range that we have on this camera is quite limited, as it would be for any sort of smaller size sensor camera. So my brightest aperture is f2.8. I get that at 24 millimeters, but when I go to 2000 millimeters, I'm shooting f6.5. And my only other aperture choice is f8, and that's it. And you know, to be honest, considering that we've got a 1/2.3 size sensor here, I think even at f6.5, I'm going to be getting some diffraction, certainly at f8. And so my image is going to be soft whether I like it or not at 2000 millimeters. Considering the atmospheric problems, the heat distortion problems and stuff, I think what I'm going to try to do is get some 2000 millimeter shots of things closer to me, just give you a better idea of the kind of quality we can get out of this lens. Now, the camera handling does feel very similar to the 900 series. Good grip, I mean, certainly very comfortable, large. You get a nice purchase on the lens and you can certainly counterbalance it with the grip on the side of the lens with your left hand. It cradles really nicely, and again, that's so important with that super telephoto lens. Flip out screen is nice, but I do wish that it was a touch screen interface. Now, I find quite often when I have a camera like this with a big telephoto range, if I'm looking for wildlife in the brush or leaves or something, it'd be hard to find it. Sometimes you're so zoomed in that it's really hard to actually find your target. So I would find that I would zoom out the camera. Oh, there it is, zoom it back in, but it's quite slow. And this has a really handy feature. There's a snap zoom button here on the side. Now, when I push it, it zooms the lens wide, but it shows me a box of my original focal length that I was at. This is really handy because I can zoom out wide just by pushing this button. There's the target, get this box over the target, push it again, and it zooms right back in, and that's been really handy. Now, you don't have free reign to customize all the controls on this camera, but you do get a lot of dials and controls, and I like that. This side dial, for example, I've customized for aperture. My back wheel I've set for exposure compensation, and so I feel like I can get all my settings changed very quickly, very naturally with a little bit of practice. So overall, that's also very handy on this camera. Now, the sensor that we have here is 16 megapixels, which by today's standards is not high, but it's still way more than a lot of people need. And you know, from what I'm seeing, and certainly what DeepYourView.com tested when they played with the Coolpix 900, which has, you know, the same kind of lens, it's a very sharp lens. You know, when you get the conditions right and motion blur is not an issue, it's optically actually quite good throughout its whole range. So yeah, you get nice shots out of it for sure. Look at that, there's a toilet paper crisis, and yet we leave it out here for anybody who needs it. Canada, such a great country. Now the Coolpix 950 has a battery SEPA rating of 290 shots, which is actually more than I expected. You know, we do have a motorized zoom, that's gonna eat up battery life and such, so I'm pleased to see that higher number. One thing I am doing though that I like that you can set on this camera is I'm setting it so that my telephoto lens is mostly extended when I turn the camera on, kind of a memory effect. That way you're not always having to zoom in, but you can set multiple focal lengths that you want the lens to start at when you turn the camera on. Now, here's how long it takes to actually turn the camera on. I'm gonna hit it now. And I can shoot now. So not bad, half a second, 3/4 of a second, and you're ready to shoot. A lot better than a lot of the older cameras that this camera is based off of. Now there's a really nice benefit on the 950 series over the 900. And that is that we have RAW photography as an option. Before it was just JPEG only. So I still have all my standard color profiles for JPEG, but I do have that RAW option when I want the extra malleability of the file. So I wanted to see just how good the camera stabilizer would be with this lens. So as you can see, I'm leaning up against the wall. I've got the camera up against my face, elbows nice and tight and in. I'm shooting 2000 millimeters, and I did a few tests to see how slow the shutter speed could go before I was getting some noticeable motion blur. And I would say that, you know, around 20th of a second, 30th of a second is still fairly usable. There is some blur, but it's minor. Below that, it really starts to fall apart. But I'd say from 40th of a second, 60th of a second, and faster, assuming my subject's not moving, I can actually get sharp handheld shots, you know, against a wall. But all in all, very impressive for the stabilization on this lens. Now I know we're saying a lot of good things about this lens and its capabilities, the length, the stability, and they're absolutely true. Its quality is good, but there are some issues here too because it is a complicated formula. When you point this lens at things like the sun, for example, which by the way, of course, is just this disc-shaped light source, much like an LED flat panel about 3,300 miles away from the surface of our flat planet, you get some pretty crazy flare effects, a lot of ghosting, you know, lots of strange shapes. So just expect that. I mean, you might find creative uses for, you know, when you take pictures of that thing we call the sun. When you find a family of chubby ground squirrels, it's adorable, all right? They're just super fluffy, they're super cute. But the second state we're gonna say is that when you are shooting this camera at 2000 millimeters, I cannot reiterate enough that it can be very difficult. Even bracing myself up against something like this and having the camera up to my eye, right up to the EVF to stabilize everything, the stabilizer is absolutely getting me some sharp pictures, but when I push the button and the shutter, just the delay from pushing it, the blackout time to the shot that I actually get, it's often different from the frame that I was originally composing. In some cases, quite seriously so. So I could see a lot of cropping afterwards just to kind of get it exactly where you wanted it, or multiple shots, or use a tripod with a camera like this with a gimbal head, which seems quite odd for a camera this size.
Pants.
No, I'm not taking pictures of pants. No, you do this every time. You try to make me take pictures of weird discarded clothing. I'm not gonna do it. No, not this time. Now, one really big improvement on the Coolpix 950 is this new 2.4 million dot EVF. So much higher resolution than before, but also doesn't have that field sequential tearing, that RGB color splitting. So I really like that, especially because I'm spending a lot of time with the camera up to my eye. When I'm shooting telephoto on this kind of camera, I cannot be shooting handheld like this. I need the stability, so it's really good that EVF is so much better. So my mom was a florist, and naturally that means I have a disdain for artificial flowers. They're super tacky. Except in the dead of winter when I need to do a macro test, then they're wonderful. Say what you will about small sensored cameras, but they really do have some nice advantages for macro. First off, you can get physically incredibly close. At 24 millimeters, I'm mashed right up against the lens, but also you get more depth of field naturally, and that is really helpful when you're trying to get things in focus. And with the image stabilization on this camera, it's actually a really nice platform for macro. At 200, you can see here, I get more compression, a little bit further away, but still good close-up capabilities. So overall, a very creative macro platform. Now the P950 does struggle a little bit in low light, and part of that's because it has a small sensor. I mean, you can see here at 800 ISO, it's getting pretty noisy. It's still usable, but you know, anything higher than that's gonna get pretty rough. And also autofocus is an issue because it's only contrast detect in sunlight. It's doing a great job. Overcast, not having any problems, but as I start to get into darker areas, it just can't focus, or it struggles to focus. I'm looking for things that have detail and contrast to try to get it to pick up. Single point, still having some issues. Now, luckily, the Coolpix 950 does have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connection, which is fine. It works very well. The SnapBridge app is much improved, but don't worry, it doesn't have any of that 5G connectivity stuff, because that's controlling us, and you know it. You know, 5G stands for government, 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 government. That's too much government. Now, Nikon also released the Coolpix P1000, which has a 3000mm equivalent lens, and a lot of people did buy that. I don't think it was so much for the lens as much as they wanted the RAW capabilities, the 4K videos, a lot of the features that we now have in the 950, which the Coolpix P900 did not have. But to be totally honest with you, I actually prefer the P950. I already know that this lens is fantastic. And you know, you can see Jordan's shot here. We've got this Raven right at the top of this very tall apartment building here in Calgary. And I can zoom right in there, still get a nice sharp picture of it. And it's very impressive. I don't know what I would do with 3000mm. So of course, with this camera having such a long lens, I did the obligatory moonshots for you, which we have visited. And you know, with the detail and stability being excellent, I certainly didn't see any flags. I didn't see any rover trails, didn't see any boot prints, nothing like that, just a flat disc.
Jordan here to talk about video on the Nikon P950, and it is a huge step above the P900, which was limited to just 1080 recording. Now they've given you the 4K recording from the P1000. Now, unfortunately, this is only going to get you 4K at 30 and 25 frames per second. We shoot 24, so we're doing 25 today. It'll match fairly well, but I'd like to see a true 24 in the future. We do get a mic jack on this camera, and you can set your audio levels when you're in the menu, but unfortunately, once you actually start recording, there's no way to adjust or even monitor what your levels actually are, and to make matters worse, there's no headphone jack. So if audio is important to you, probably not the right camera. Now, there's not a lot of cameras that are going to get you a 2000mm equivalent, and that does work quite nicely on this. You can set a custom zoom speed, but while zooming, you might notice a little bit of shimmering in the focus and the exposure, but it is a very cool feature if you're planning to do wildlife, things like that. That said, however, the rolling shutter is quite bad in this camera, so you're probably going to want to get a video tripod that costs twice what this camera does if you want usable results at the long end from it.
Hey Chris, Jordan tells me that you need some kind of science intervention.
Okay, before you try to change my mind, all right? I'm a photographer. I know light. They're called crepuscular rays, Stephen, all right? The sun is only 3,000 miles away. That's why when the light comes through the clouds, it comes down at acute angles. If it was as far away as you people claim it would come straight down through the clouds, hit the earth. There would be no separating the light. What my senses show me must be the truth.
All right, you're wrong, and I'm gonna tell you why. We gotta go back, all the way back to the time when people were like, completely ignorant about all of this. That's why there's no ice wall around the Earth. The Earth is round, and jets and airplanes follow great circles along the Earth.
Okay.
That's the best path for them.
Okay, but it is still true that the Illuminati owns all the major airlines and they're mind controlling us with contrail sprays, right? Steven. Just going to the bathroom? Okay, I'll see you. Well, that was certainly an enlightening review for myself. The last thing that I'm going to say about this P950 is that, you know, having that sensor, that size, 1/2.3 size, a lot of people are going to think, oh, these are redundant, these are silly. And, you know, smartphones do use the same size sensors in a lot of cases. And frankly, smartphones take better photos because they have that computational advantage. But this particular camera still gives very interesting results and gives you that optical zoom range to an extreme degree, and that's just something that smartphones are not going to be able to touch for a very long time. And so in that regard, I do think that the Coolpix 950 could be a very interesting tool and a very compelling tool for a lot of people. Please go to deepreview.com. There's actually an article and written review about the P1000 camera. That could be an interesting read. And you can also see our sample galleries from today with this camera as well. Check those out. Instagram and Twitter, of course. Please check those. Subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for joining us. So, I'm sorry, I'm right.
All right, you're wrong, and I'm going to tell you why.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.